Hi and welcome to TeachMeet WA Reach. This is episode 9 of our series, and my name's Hannah Dodds, your host for this evening, and I'm joined by Kate, Cameron and Adam Brooks, and we'll introduce them shortly. I'll just screen share as we go through a couple of the things we need to know about for tonight. So TeachMeet is PL by teachers for teachers, and our TeachMeet Reach is all an online hangout available via YouTube, and we are live streaming tonight through Facebook as well. If you wish to tweet to us while we're presenting this evening, you can follow and tag at WAPLN. And you can also hashtag TeachMeetWA or TeachMeetWA Reach as well. You can check into the website and see any upcoming TeachMeets that are in person as well on that website link there. And our YouTube channel is there for people who would like to view this after the presentation tonight. So tonight we have a series of presenters. We have Kate, who's going to introduce herself shortly, doing the design process and designing learning spaces. Then I'm going to be presenting student-driven evolving spaces. Adam is going to be talking about his Googly adventures on his recent trip as a Google innovator. And Cameron is going to be talking about a podcast, TER 100. So we'll hand it over first to introduce ourselves. So we'll start with you, Kate, if you don't mind introducing your name and what school you're from.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Kate Wilson. I'm a Year 2 teacher and the iPad curriculum developer for Newman Primary School in the Pilbara in Western Australia. I'm currently studying my Masters in ICT and Education, and I'm doing a unit on designing spaces for learning, both physical and virtual.
Thanks, Kate. And we'll switch to Cameron. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Cameron Malcher. I'm the host and producer of the Teachers Education Review podcast. I'm based in New South Wales, where I've been a teacher for 11 years and where I'm currently actually taking a small hiatus from teaching to work as the communications officer for the New South Wales Teachers Federation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cameron. And the lovely Adam, our co-host, who is very zippily running around doing the live streaming from separate computers tonight. Adam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Hannah. My name's Adam Brooks. I'm the Digital Technologies Coordinator at Colby Catholic College in Rockingham, and we do have sound working now, so that's why I was zipping off. I didn't want another mistake after last TeachMeet Reach, so we've got it all working, hopefully. So if you're having issues with sound, let us know ASAP, but I think it's all working. I've just checked.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. And I'm Hannah Dodds. I am a Year 4-5 teacher and also Deputy Principal at Harrisdale Primary School, and I'll be presenting tonight on our flexible learning space we've been doing in the classroom. So Kate, we're going to hand over to you now for your presentation, and then we will all mute and turn our cameras off while you go ahead and present.
Thanks, Hannah. So I'm not going to be doing any screen sharing or anything like that. You just get to look at my face. So to start off with, I'm going to be mainly discussing the process for designing a space for learning. And that learning space can be physical, blended, and sorry, I'm just going to move this quickly. There we go. So physical, blended, or virtual learning environments that actually enhance learning. So this statement is by researchers Park and Choi, and just have a listen because I think it will actually resonate with quite a few people who are listening to this podcast. So a building and its learning spaces are designed to last for about 50 to 100 years. The curriculum and courses that are taught in those spaces may change every 10 years or less, and educational technology may change every year. So it's time to consider a new approach for learning spaces to ensure that classrooms are appropriately equipped for students of the future. Now, when you're actually looking at the process of design, you have a bit of a contradiction. So you can view space as open, flexible, and innovative that can develop capacities for students in the 21st century learning, or it's a stagnant, contained, traditional, or a realist approach to designing spaces for learning. So research actually states that space and its occupants are directly related, and designers constantly have to think about how that space is being created, but how it has an impact and responds to humans' needs as well. So talking more about the process of design, hang on one second, there's messages coming through. Okay, good. So you can all still hear and see me then. So speaking about the process of design and the role of design briefs when creating a space, they can actually kind of hinder the process, because a lack of prescribed briefs allow the designers, the creators, and the clients and everyone like that to be really creative and to design the space from a personal perspective. As soon as you have those restrictions and those limits, it kind of cuts it off. So a less prescriptive approach would facilitate a personal approach and encourage that individual voice. And this can be found in classroom refurbs. For example, I don't know if anyone else has been involved in like a new school opening or classroom refurbs and things like that. Hang on. No, all good? Okay. So with classroom refurbs and in new schools and things like that, teachers are often asked for their input, but we're actually not designers. And architects design the room and they have a say in everything like that, but they're not classroom teachers. They aren't the one using the space. So there needs to be a healthy balance. And if you are using a design brief, the educational goals need to be very, very, very clear, and that space needs to accommodate those educational goals, because you cannot have, it doesn't work for anyone if you have a space that the pedagogy doesn't align with the space. So your teaching methods and your curricula and your space all need to align. And the actual designing process requires creative and critical thinking, like most aspects in life. So when you think about it, when rational thinking leads, creative thinking is needed for innovative ideas. And when creative thinking leads, you need that critical evaluation to appropriate the situation. So you can't go too overboard, and you've got to be reasonable, but you do need that creative side to it. Cameron, I see that you've just popped up. Are you all good there?
I'm good. I'm just trying to do something in the background.
Okay. Okay, cool. So research has also suggested that space exerts significant influences on human activity, and that newly designed classroom can actually alter the in-class dynamics, and it can break down the hierarchy that divide the teacher and the students in the traditional classroom settings. So within that, we also need to keep the students accountable. And a way to do that is to use active learning. So the space will need to complement that active learning environment, as well as that pedagogy. So those teaching methods, once again, it's the teaching methods, the space, and your pedagogy all needs to align. And students are going to have to be able to transition through spaces without difficulty, because they're going to have to be able to adapt and utilize the affordances that space and learning can offer with their mobile technology as well. So that's pretty much the theory and the process of actually designing the space. It's not just an easy little thing to just sit down and nut out. You really, really have to think about that opening statement there. Our curricula, the pedagogy, and the space, they all have to align, because it's detrimental to students' learning, and it actually uses cognitive and physical resources when you have teaching methods that don't align with your space. So that's, I've been really, really quick, but that's pretty much all I have to say about the theory of the design process. I was wondering what you guys think about it, because it's quite an interesting topic, and I don't know if anyone has had to ever design a space or go through that process, and what your thoughts are about that.
I definitely agree with you, Kate. I like how you talked about curriculum, teaching methods and space needing to all fit together. And I think initially when I was beginning a flexible space to match the one-to-one iPad program we were initiating within our classroom, I had been to so many teach meets and seen all the amazing furniture, and I was so driven by the space, and I really needed to focus on some of those other things like curriculum and the teaching practice. And I had to overcome some hurdles through implementing a full flexible space without really considering all of those little things that were really important. So it's funny you're talking about the research and all the things that I kind of realised over time. So it's nice to hear that side of things from you.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, like, I can completely understand how if you had a teacher who, like, I just can't imagine being in that situation where your space can't accommodate to your pedagogy and vice versa. Like, I think that it's not just a room, there's so much more to it, and the process that goes into, you know, ensuring that everything aligns and marries up, it's so vital. I mean, research is even, like I said, it shows it has huge detrimental effects to the cognitive process and of students learning and things like that. It's massive.
You were talking a little bit earlier before we went live about some of the colour schemes and things that you've been implementing or been researching. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, and what are some benefits or designs for teaching and learning with regard to this?
Yes. So I, through my research, through the millions and millions of papers that I've read and journals I've read, it feels like, what came across, it was quite apparent, is that classroom colours, pinboard colours, all that sort of thing needs to be as natural and neutral as possible and not bright and overwhelming, because that has a huge impact on students' learning. So all of, like, I don't know if anyone has ever experienced this, when you get like a classroom refurb and you get these big, beautiful, bright new things that you're going to have to cover up with like a plain beige kind of material sort of thing, just to ensure that it's not distracting, it's not too bright, and that those design elements are incorporated. Because I mean, there's quite a few. There's things like light, air conditioning, sounds, background noise, you know, transition spaces, all of that accompanies designing a space for learning. And I mean, of course, you can go on to, I think his name is Thornburg, who's got his caves, his water holes and all that sort of thing as well. And I'd be really interested to hear from people who have pelt with that aspect, like the cave, the water hole and that sort of thing, and how they found that experience in their class. Because like any of this, I think you can say one thing on a piece of paper, but what it actually translates into a real classroom with your class, I mean, all kids, you know, all groups of kids are really different. I want to know how that has gone.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm such a nerd and I have the book right here.
You are a nerd, Miss Dodds.
I did read quite a bit about that, and that was the message that I received at a lot of the conferences and teach meets that I went to about using this approach. And so I found when I tried that, I was speaking to you earlier about it before we started the Hangout, the hurdle was that kids didn't really know how to use that space. So I didn't really scaffold it enough to teach them how to use that environment. And so I found I really needed to teach them a little bit more, explicitly model how to work independently within some of those spaces, because I suppose sometimes I wonder if we structure our classrooms so much across the years, especially in primary schools. We have a lot of rotations and children do things at specified times. And I wonder if that's having an effect on their coping mechanisms and their learning in more of an independent space, where they're having to have study skills and be able to kind of monitor their own learning and work a little bit more independently within an environment like that. So yeah, it was an interesting experience, and I'm still learning a lot.
Like from what I can gather, I think it takes a healthy balance. Like, I think that you have to structure your space to ensure that your students are accountable and that you have to structure your teaching methods so that your students are accountable, but so that the students are actively learning. So whether that is in groups or whether that is individual, I think that, or whether you diminish the front of the classroom and the back of the classroom, but you still keep all the students accountable, whether that's in caves, waterholes, etc., you know, whatever. But I do think that it is a bit of trial and error, I've found. But I would be really interested to hear more people's opinions on what it is actually like and how it's implemented. And have you gone through that design process from scratch? Or like, is it your pedagogy that's leading your design, like, or your decision to do this, or is it the space that's defining what you do, sort of thing?
It's really interesting. Yeah. Cameron and Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to add on what Kate's talking about there?
I do have a question.
Yep.
Sorry, I do have a question. I just realised I was muted. Sorry. You mentioned that a lot of this talk was about primary schools. Now, I come from a high school English teaching and drama teaching background where, you know, you've got a different group of students coming in every other period, and sometimes you're even sharing the room with another teacher. How do some of these principles play out in a high school space with shared learning spaces?
Well, I think actually a lot of the research that I've come across is actually to do with high school and university, and creating those flexible spaces in high school has been quite successful, and in universities as well. And I'm wondering whether Hannah and I are in that similar boat with the primary school students having difficulty with it, but it's been more successful in high school and university kind of stages. But I think a lot of it has to do with, like Hannah said, ensuring that the students know what to do at those spaces.
Okay, thanks.
I'll reserve my judgment until I present my presentation.
Oh,
no, it's quite interesting, like listening to your research, and what Google have done with their spaces is quite contrary to what you're talking about. So I wonder
this might happen.
Yeah, and it seems to work for them. So I'm just wondering what the difference is. So I'll show you the photos of my my adventures of Google when we get to that stage, and perhaps I'll talk about their spaces.
Like, I think like a lot of the research, all the research is pretty much suggesting that this is what we should be doing, sort of thing. But it's a matter of, like I say, like that pedagogy needs to change. Like maybe it's not, like maybe my pedagogy isn't changing with this. Maybe I'm actually too old school at the ripe old age of 26, sort of thing. Like it's just a matter of, I think a huge part of it is self-reflection, research, pedagogy.
Yeah.
I think too, it's interesting because we have the high school context, and Adam's going to later talk about Google, which is, I suppose, like an adult environment, workplace. And then we have a primary school context. So it's really interesting to see how it plays out in different contexts, and how people adapt it differently to their different learners' needs. And yeah, I suppose that's what it's all about, as well as catering to those students' needs, or those adults' needs, or high school students' needs. So it's a really interesting conversation.
Yeah,
all right,
definitely.
Well, I might start on my presentation, Kate, but thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Right.
And
can't wait to be annihilated by
Adam. It's all right. That's what this is for. I suppose this is how we learn, isn't it? Differing discussion and talking about what different research says and what's working and what's not. So it's all how we learn, which is fun. All right, well, I'll just screen share and talk you through my presentation. So today I'm just going to be going through, really it's an iBook that I've just finished writing regarding my learning experience through trying to put through a flexible learning space within my classroom. And like I said with Kate before, the way that I went about it, I was very focused on the space and the furniture initially, and slowly over time realised that I did really need to focus on that existing pedagogy and making sure I was matching those things up and aligning them. So I found within my journey that that's been something that's been quite important. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is reflection. So one of the things that I did before I started, I did a bit of a reflection and used a book of Action Research, which is on the screen there, and there's a link through the iBook as well if you're interested in having a look at it. And I thought about what was already working really well in my classroom, what benefits a flexible learning space could have for students, what impact could this change have on achievement and engagement, how could I obtain information and data to track along the way and see how this project of flexible learning spaces was going. How would I monitor ongoing implementation and whether it was creating that positive impact specifically on achievement of students? And how would I continuously improve my own learning and obtain external feedback along the way? So that was kind of my pre-thought before I began a flexible learning space. And then what I did, I used Google Forms, but I've also listed there some other ways that you could seek student input about what they currently liked in the classroom, what would they prefer to have, and what sorts of things with regard to their learning and the types of tasks they were doing would they like to do more of. And it was really interesting because it gave me a totally different perspective than I had ever thought about my students. And I really got to dig deep about how they felt they learnt best, which was a really interesting realisation for me. Within doing that, I had come from quite a structured Kagan cooperative learning background and with teams working together at desks all the time. So I still wanted to capture that element of Kagan cooperative learning. So I kept my class building and team building because I felt that that was really an underpinning principle that I felt was important for social skill building, and especially at a primary school level. Even though students were going to work in the flexible space, in some cases independently, I still felt it was really important to teach them about collaboration and scaffold that a little bit for them. And I started doing some professional reading. So the What's in Your Space book and the Third Teacher, I skimmed through and just found pieces that I thought were really relevant to helping me along the way. So then we got to a point where we were talking about designing the space together, and I really wanted to seek student ownership within that time. So we used Babe Ward, and in their collaborative teams, they discussed design and they created what they thought was a really good learning space. And it created really in-depth discussion about what they thought was beneficial for their learning, and it gave me a lot of realizations. We had a few students designing McDonald's in our learning space, and we had to talk about why that might not be so beneficial for their learning. So yeah, it was a really interesting process. Some of them did take it very seriously, and they were thinking really hard about how comfortable they felt, and some of them were replicating things from their home environment, so that kind of indicated to me they wanted a comfortable space that they could do their learning in, which is interesting. And then this is, I suppose, what Kate was talking a lot about, is the pedagogy. So this is something that came about to me as I went along, and I adapted what I've referred to as workflows. So initially I went and ripped the Band-Aid off, and we went full flexible learning space, and I would give them some of their tasks and differentiate for various groups. And I would let them go and choose where they wanted to sit to complete those sets of tasks. And they had choice over what order they completed the tasks in and how they went about that. And within that, I really started to notice, as I mentioned before, that the students needed a little bit more structure, and I went a lot way too free initially because they were coming up to me a lot asking, what should I do next? And they had been through, I suppose, those learning environments where they were doing a lot of rotations and centres, maths and literacy centres, so they had never done anything like this before. So I had to really rein it in a little bit. I didn't pull it right back in, but I started to give some students timers to help them with their time management, and they started to independently go and get timers to help them time their tasks and make sure they completed everything. in a timely manner and got it done by the specified date at the end of the week, or whenever it was due, depending on the task that we had set. I started to push a lot of videos and work by Seesaw so that students could rewatch videos, which is a lot of the flipped learning kind of concept that they could refer back to. And it was really beneficial because learners who needed something several more times could go back and review that content. And so I suppose I also, as we were talking about before, I really had to adapt this workflow to my context. So the cooperative learning had to come in within that. And also our school has an explicit teaching model and is very big on Hattie and our Walton Wilf and making sure our lesson intentions are very specific. So I had to intertwine that within the way that I did a workflow. So it might be a little bit different to how others have done it before. But I adapted it as I went, and I kind of noticed different needs in the classroom and made sure that we kind of changed that depending on what the students' needs were. And as I mentioned just before, flipped learning was really something that started to evolve. We had a one-to-one iPad program starting in term 2, and I think we had about 86 to 90% uptake, which was really good. And we filled out the rest of the class with spare school devices. So students were accessing a lot of the content on Seesaw, as I mentioned. And we also, more recently this term, have been doing iTunes U, and they're working a little bit more at their own pace, and they're able to access content to extend themselves if they need to, which is really awesome. So it is working a lot more effectively now. I've popped in the iBook some resources about flipped learning, and I'm not going to talk too much about that. But as Kate said before, accountability is something that's been really important. So I recently got a Pratt student this term, and one thing that she's implemented that I really liked was she's got their names, and we can track exactly where they're at with their learning, because sometimes it is really difficult to know who's where and what they're up to. Are they managing their time effectively in that space? And that's something we've had to learn over time, that we need to keep them accountable and keep monitoring, keep that pressure on a little bit so that they still do their work and get it done, but also giving them that freedom to work a little bit more at their own pace and where they're feeling comfortable. So it's been a real learning journey for me, and I'm still learning, still finding things to improve on. So I'm really interested to hear Cameron and Adam's presentations tonight. And Kate, I'm so looking forward to picking your brain a little bit more too. But that's pretty much it for me. And the iBook, I'll send the link via Twitter and on Facebook, is available with lots of interactive links and resources if anyone wants any of that. So yeah, now we're moving on to Cameron, I think. Oh no, we're moving on to Adam, sorry. Adam is presenting his Googly adventure. And lots of pictures are here, so we're really looking forward to that. And then Cameron, you're after Adam. Are you there, Adam? Oh, he's not there. Maybe Cameron, are you happy to go next, and maybe Adam can go afterwards? Is that okay?
Sure thing.
Okay, great. Well, we'll pass over to you whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks very much. As I said at the introduction, I produce and host the Teachers Education Review podcast, which some of your audience hopefully are familiar with, but I'm not going to assume everybody knows where I'm coming from. We've been producing this podcast now for a little over 4 years, and when it first started out, it was myself and Corinne Campbell, who's now taken on a principal's role at a school here in New South Wales, which, as I'm sure you can appreciate, led to some time constraints, and now it's just me managing this podcast. But as I said, we've been doing this for nearly 4 years, and by the somewhat arcane way that we number our episodes, we are rapidly approaching episode number 100, which will be coming up at the beginning of October. And as a way of celebrating that 100th episode, we decided to incorporate TeachMeet. You know, TeachMeet and the philosophy behind starting this podcast have always been very closely aligned. And in fact, a whole series of our episodes are devoted to recordings of TeachMeets. And just over the last few months, we've put out several TeachMeet centered episodes where I'll go along and record all the presentations, and those that I have permission from the presenters to put out, I will compile into a podcast episode, which we usually put under the banner TER Live. Now, obviously, for our 100th episode and doing a nationwide podcast, getting everybody together in one room was not really a feasible proposition. So for the purpose of this coming event, we've come up with the idea of an online podcast-centered TeachMeet, not dissimilar to what you're doing here with TeachMeet WA Reach. And so we're having TeachMeet TER 100 for our 100th episode. And we're inviting anybody who has something to share to do a recording, not dissimilar to what we're doing tonight, although people who, like myself, may find jumping in front of the camera at short notice a little bit confronting, can do it in audio-only formats. And we're asking people to just, as with any TeachMeet, 6 to 7 minutes on any topic that you're passionate about. It can be a matter of curriculum. It can be a matter of classroom practice. It can be a matter of policy even, or even research that you've read that you'd like to share with a wider audience. But the easy way to get involved is to go to bit.ly/TER100, and that is capital TER100, so bit.ly/TER100, where you will find not only some guidelines on how to record. I've provided some technical suggestions there for people who may not be comfortable or familiar with recording themselves in this way. And there's also a link to upload and submit your file once it's completed. So anybody who's interested, we are getting close to the 100th episode. Submissions close towards the end of September. The Monday, the last week of September was the deadline, and the episode will be going online the first weekend of October. That's when TER 100 will be uploaded. So hopefully people watching who also have a passion for not only TeachMeets and for sharing practice, but maybe some people who have also listened to the podcast and would like to contribute, we'd love to have their involvement in this 100th episode.
Wow, that's awesome, Cameron. Thank you for sharing. I was just tweeting out to you saying how great it sounds, and it's a really awesome initiative that you've got going there. So thanks for sharing it, and thanks for coming on at such late notice. We really appreciate you talking about TER.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Adam, we're moving on to you now. Are you ready?
I'm not sure if I'm not sure if we're still streaming at the moment. That's what I was just trying to check out. I don't know what's happened. It seems to be working on my computer, but it doesn't seem to be displaying anything on Facebook. I don't know if that's because I'm trying to stream so much at the same time, but we'll keep going and hopefully it's working. Otherwise, we'll see what we can do about that afterwards.
Okay, right. Well, I'll hand over to you, and I'll see in the background if I can see what's going on.
Cool, thank you. All right, so recently I went to Sydney as part of the Google Certified Innovator course. I was one representative from WA. There was about 36 teachers from around the world who got accepted into the cohort. So I was very humbled to be a part of it. And I'm no expert when it comes to learning spaces. It's something that I'm new to, and I'm really trying to get my head around it, particularly because I come from a digital technologies space. So we've got a set lab layout at the moment, and I'm looking at what potentially we might be able to do in the future if we get the chance to redesign the space, because it's really set up for kind of individual learning, and it doesn't kind of fit the more cooperative structures that I try to implement within my own classroom. So, because of the way it's structured, we can't actually do that at a cheap cost to change that space. So what I wanted to talk to you about was my visit to Sydney and actually going to Google's offices in Sydney, and just share some of the photos that were taken or that I took as we went around the space, to give you an idea of what Google do in order to be creative. So I'm just going to screen share here. No, I don't want to do that. All right. So this is the Google Sydney headquarters. We got a chance to meet Jimmy Chu from MasterChef, and we did a bit of a challenge. Let's see if I'm going the right way here. Going the wrong way. All right, so here's a bit of our MasterChef challenge. It didn't have to look good. Sorry, didn't have to taste good. It just had to look good. So we had 5 ingredients to be a bit creative and use those skills, get us started in the morning. So here's some of their spaces. So what you need to know about Google is they're not time-sheeted. So people come and go as they please. All their meals are put on for them. So there's a restaurant where you can get breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there's a barista on hand to make you coffees, and you can take breaks at any time. And so they've got a number of these spaces here to just kind of hang out, talk to others, and really trying to get people to be creative. So the whole emphasis is on these spaces for people to be creative with each other and just come up with new ideas. So this is their Lego table. Just over to the left here, they also had a maker space with sewing machines, all the electronics goods, woods and metalwork stuff. They also had like welding equipment and all kinds of cool stuff. You'll see the keyboard in the background there too. And there's all these kind of spaces where you can just kind of go and hang out and relax. So a lot of people you'd see kind of dragging their laptops away from their desk and just coming to get some space by themselves. They've got a big thing about natural light and using the natural light within the space too. This is what everyone loves when they see these little hovels. So I'll give you a bit of a different view here. So just like an amazing space to just come and hang out. You'll notice here there's some like spot to stick your laptop or your book. So yeah, just a wonderful place. You can see all the kind of that industrial look as well. So here we've got a puzzle table. So they've just got a puzzle, telescopes. Once again, lots of natural light coming in. They had colouring in as well over here. Secret door. I mean, how geeky is that? So geeky cool. So this is actually a bookshelf, and you actually had to kind of press a button in the bookshelf. So really cool stuff. And all these kinds of hovels, just different spots everywhere where you can just kind of come and relax. This is, I guess, the in-joke. So all of their rooms are themed, and this was the room without any windows in it. And if you take a look at the name on the door here, that's their kind of Microsoft joke here. So they made it the most boring-looking room in the whole office, and they called it the XP room because it doesn't have any windows. So I thought my geeky friends would get a good laugh out of that one. Climbing walls, pool tables, once again, these kind of areas to hang out. Everything's got the kind of the Google colours all around the place. Recording studio, okay, you know, imagine having to work with a recording studio. And that's the best thing. People were just kind of coming out, hanging out for half an hour, playing music together. There was one guy that was bringing his guitar out to the open space at lunchtime and just playing the guitar. While people were kind of having lunch. It was just fantastic. You know, these spirally staircases. These are all my fellow innovators here too. This is my favourite room in the whole place here. So this is called Hazmat. And so you'll see up here the 2 hazardous material outfits. And what they did was 2 people dressed up and actually shot paintballs at the wall. So not this stuff on the table here, that's kind of been manually painted, but all this stuff on the wall is paintballs, which is kind of going against what Kate was saying before. That's what I was talking about, a little bit of contrast there. And the reasoning for it was like all the people that worked in the office had an input into the themes of the rooms and what they chose. And I guess this was one of the things that the developers came up with. So pretty cool. Yeah, these kind of almost like Japanese style bridges between rooms. This was a little hovel where you could actually pull down this and take a nap. And that's about it from me. They also had a number of other different spaces. So they had a virtual reality, augmented reality space. There's one room which was a meeting room which was filled with pot plants. So there was kind of 4 spots to sit in the room, but you couldn't actually kind of see each other from those 4 spots because of all of these branches. So it was a really interesting kind of creative space to have a meeting and not be able to see the other people. So I found that really interesting. The cafe space itself was really quite open and conducive for starting those conversations. And yeah, it was really just an interesting creative space to be in. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And so I guess the one thing that I wanted to share was that I think in order to have a creative space where you want people to be creative, there needs to be something that inspires that. And that's, I think, the Google approach and what they've done there. And I think it's kind of contrasting to what the research is saying about learning spaces. But maybe it's sort of like an additional input that that might need to be thought about in terms of those spaces where we want that design thinking, we want that kind of creativity, we want those juices flowing. Maybe there needs to be a different space for those things as opposed to like a typical classroom space. So no research, just some fun spaces.
I was thinking about that as you were going through those pictures, and that paintball room, it looks amazing. And I think one of the reasons why it could be really successful is that because those people would have ownership over it, especially if they were the ones who shot the paintballs. They have a connection to it. There's a relationship there. It's meaningful. Yeah. I'm talking about more in terms of like if you have bright, like the color of my like thing that says my name there, Kate Wilson or whatever. I'm talking about like bright blue pinboards that overwhelm the kind of space, whereas that one had the paintballs and stuff shot at the back, and then they had big whiteboards covering a lot of that space. So there's a bit of, but there's still a relationship there. Whereas if you can imagine being a 6-year-old child and walking to that room sort of thing into like a classroom with those bright blue pinboards, you'd have a bit of a different, you wouldn't have that personal connection to it or that relationship with that space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic.
Can I suggest?
I did have a question for you, Adam, as well.
Oh, yeah.
What was one sneaking in? What was one thing that you saw on your Google venture that you would like to implement in your own classroom? Was there any sort of design elements that you thought, wow, the kids would just froth on this, they'd love it?
Do you know the one thing that kind of shone out? I mean, there was such amazing spaces, and that was really just interesting, just being in those spaces, especially with all those creative minds from around the world. It was just an amazing space to be in. But the one thing that kind of stood out was everything was ready to be creative in each room. So I'm not sure if that actually showed in the photos, but in that kind of hazmat photo, they've got on the desk, they've got whiteboard markers ready to go. They've got Post-it notes ready to go. They had spots where you could actually plug in your screen from your chair. So everything was always ready to go in the open spaces as well. So all the kitchen areas, there was all your food and drink kind of ready to go. So if you wanted a soft drink, you just kind of grab it and go. There was shelves with chargers. So if you forgot your phone charger for the day, you just go grab a charger off the shelf, and so it doesn't stop you from from working, you are in these spaces, and the spaces are set up ready to go. And that's the one thing that kind of stood out. And I think sometimes, when it takes you 10, 15, 20 minutes, particularly like if you're going to a meeting with other staff members and you're waiting for people to get organised, and there's no whiteboard markers in the room, and so someone's got to go out the room. Those spaces were set up ready to be creative, and that's what I loved about them.
What were those things in that hazmat room on the table? It's almost like there's like a slit in the table, like something like you could pull up, or what was that?
Yeah, I think those were additional screens, as far as I was aware. Oh, wow. So like they're screens on a not on a hinge system, but like on a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a ball bearing, lift up. So once again, it was just there, kind of ready to go, and that's what's cool about it.
It's so intriguing. It's like a whole nother world, I reckon. Like it just
really
makes you wonder. Yeah. It really does. Like you just think, okay, this is what we're in for. This is what we've got to prepare for. This is what we've got to implement, innovate. Yeah.
Cameron, did you have a question before as well?
I was just interested in the difference, I suppose, between a flexible learning space versus space devoted to creating or fostering creative thought. The Google space certainly seems engendered to people who are going in to be creative. It's free from distractions, it's allowing for boredom, and it's taking away all other needs that might distract from whatever thought process you're on in order to generate and pursue creative ideas. And I'm wondering how that differs from what the research says about flexible learning spaces, where Kate mentioned that an understanding of routine and how to use the flexible learning space was kind of essential even in a high school environment, while it seems like the Google space is almost quite the opposite. There's no routine. There's just follow your train of thought and your behavior wherever it leads you, in the hope that you come out with the next idea for Google. I'm just curious if anybody had a comment on that apparent difference, and I suppose the translation of one of the creative space into a school context.
I don't know about you, Hannah, but coming from a primary school perspective, and it's not the same thing, but it kind of gives me heart palpitations looking at those rooms, trying to imagine my children in a space like that. But it isn't. They're two very separate things. I think, like Cameron, you made a really good point. There's designing a space for learning and designing a creative space that produces creativity. I think they are two very different things, but I think it shows a huge possibility that somehow that these spaces could be intertwined, and that's a direction that we could be leading into and heading towards. So I think that is like a very, very valid point there, Cameron.
Yeah. I think I'm quite passionate about the kind of challenge-based learning and project-based learning, and this kind of using the design thinking process to come up with and create products. So coming from that technologies, from the technologies curriculum there. And for me, spaces like the Google space is where I think that kind of magic might be able to happen. And we talk about like maker spaces and those kind of spaces where students can be creative. So it may not necessarily be in the day-to-day classroom, but maybe it's a space where students can go and be creative within this the school environment. So maybe it's not the flexible learning environments, but maybe this is slightly different. But I think there's a huge potential there, I think, for schools. I think we need to kind of harness some of that creativity and those spaces to be able to do that. So
I agree with you. I mean, like, Coder Dojo is a perfect example. Well, the way that we run Coder Dojo at our school, we have all of our robotics kits and it's all coding, programming, lots of STEAM, that sort of thing. And we do whatever we can to foster that creative environment. Granted, it's not like a Monday to Friday literacy block or anything like that. It's an after-school program, but it's still providing that avenue for those students to have that opportunity to be creative and to do that project-based learning and to foster and develop these 21st sensory learning skills, like their digital literacy, their collaborative, skills, all that sort of thing. So I definitely think it has a place. But yeah, it does give me heart palpitations thinking about my kids in a space like that constantly.
I agree with you, Kate. But I also think like you can have that balance between the two, can't you? So what you're saying, Adam, with how you sometimes have maker spaces, when you need those really creative juices to flow in your classroom, and you've got that context of a technologies lesson where they do have freedom to just be creative and do whatever their heart kind of wants them to do, that's a really good context to then move into some kind of creative space for them to think wildly and just follow their dreams kind of thing. So yeah, it's really interesting to have this discussion and think about those different contexts. So yeah. Okay, guys. Well, I haven't seen any questions come through from our audience. Adam, have you?
No, I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm echoing. I'm not sure if the Facebook Live videos worked, but the YouTube video should have worked. So hopefully, if people are following on the YouTube Live video, that's all worked fine. I think what's happened is my computer's actually run out of memory, so that's why it's stopped loading. So
That's all right.
Gonna figure that out in the break, but at least we've got a solution for next time. Third time lucky, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you, Cameron, who came on at the very last minute. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thoughts, and hopefully we can keep in touch and connect and further the conversation through Twitter and through our TeachMeet Facebook.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Hannah, for organising it and hosting it.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks, Adam, for being the live streamer and the organizer as well. You did a great job.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, guys.
See ya.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.